Okay, welcome everybody to this webinar. Just hoping that everybody is joining right now. But just to say a huge hello and welcome from myself to this webinar on studying in the USA at the undergraduate level. My name is Christina. I am a Education USA advisor at the US UK Fulbright Commission. I'll share a little bit more about who we are and what we do over the course of this webinar. But I just wanted to say welcome. This webinar will be covering the basics of studying in the US at the undergraduate level, and we'll be talking about various different topics, but mostly focusing on the process of choosing a university, funding a university, at the undergraduate level in the US, and also the process of applying. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will take questions at the end. There is an opportunity to put any questions in the Q&A box. So if you've got any questions as I'm kind of going through this webinar, by all means, put those questions in the box, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of this webinar. Perfect. Okay. So who are we? What is Education USA? So Education USA is an advisory service that's part of a global network. It comes under the umbrella of the US State Department, and it has over 400 advising centres across the world that are aiming to help guide international students on US study across all different levels and all of the processes that are involved in that. In the UK, we are based at the US UK Fulbright Commission here in London, and the Commission and Education USA are paired up to help people explore education in the US. And as I said, at all levels, but from the Commission side, also at a graduate level. The Commission grants a number of awards and scholarships to talented students at the graduate level too. So our aim as Education USA advisors is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And so just to reiterate what I said at the start, we are very happy to be here today to talk a little bit about the undergraduate experience. So you might be quite early on in your journey watching this webinar, and you might be wondering, why might you want to study in the US? Why not the UK? And ultimately, there's a variety of different reasons. I've put some on screen that are kind of the main areas or main topics. So firstly, there are over 4,500 US universities that offer undergraduate degrees in the US compared to about 120 in the UK. And so within that 4,500, there's a huge range of personality and style and variety. They also have some incredible reputation. US universities are known for that. They offer a full range of programs, and they're able to produce groundbreaking research. So there's also the reputation aspect as well. We'll talk a little bit about this as we go through this webinar, but we really advise that you focus on this idea of fit. As I said, there's 4,500 universities. It can be really hard, at least from the start, to think, how do I narrow that down? So we really encourage you to approach that by looking at something that we, again, will continually refer to as fit. And this will allow you to find many high quality universities, some of which you may have never even heard of, but might fit and match with the things that you're looking for, with the parameters that you have as well. US universities are also known for having a really vibrant campus life. They really encourage students to be involved outside of the classroom. There is kind of an expectation or a hope that students will get involved in a variety of different extracurriculars on campus. So this could be getting involved in music through a cappella or orchestra or dance or the sports, or all of which you could play at very different levels, right down to some really niche opportunities. So a university that I always like to mention is Wisconsin University, which has an extracurricular, a club that's kind of dedicated to log rolling. So there's a real kind of vibrant and exciting campus life and activities that you can also get involved in at a US university. The other thing to kind of mention is something called the liberal arts. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but there is kind of this liberal arts education, which is the ethos around US universities, and there's a focus also on teaching. So US universities follow this educational ideal, this ethos of the liberal arts curriculum, which ultimately means this desire for a well-rounded education. And this means that you have a flexibility to explore interests before selecting a major. There's also an emphasis on teaching, on creating an engaging classroom environment. And as I said, because of the flexibility to take and kind of do explore your different interests, there's that opportunity to take a combination of different study topics. So that could be engineering and art or history or chemistry. So if you're sat here thinking, okay, I'm looking at what I want to do at university, and yes, I love maths, and here in the UK I'd be doing a maths degree, but there is a part of me that really wants to study archaeology, or I'm not quite ready to say goodbye to history, for example. And so there's that opportunity to be quite flexible and to pick and choose the areas of study that are of interest to you as well. There's a student that I always have in mind who switched from, they started at a US university with this very strong idea of wanting to do biomedical engineering. They started that, they enjoyed it, but they took a love, or they kind of moved into global gender studies, and that all came from taking one class on feminism. So there's some ability to kind of try things out before you decide ultimately what you might want to decide, focus on. And that's different to the UK, where you've got a more restricted pathway where you're choosing your subject focus before you even start at university. US universities don't expect you to know or need to know what you want to study when you apply. In terms of funding, this is quite surprising when asked like why the US over the UK. It is a top reason. I'll discuss this more later on, but there are actually many opportunities to find a variety of scholarships in the US that offer these types of funding opportunities when compared to the loan-based program that we see here in the UK with student finance. Studying abroad generally is really appealing to employers. You are you're spending your time abroad, you are demonstrating this boldness to do something different. You might be gaining interpersonal skills, cross-cultural communication skills, all of which can be really appealing to employers and something you can kind of highlight on your CV or when you're applying to jobs. You also have the opportunity, by studying at a US university, the opportunity to build networks of friends and professional contacts around the world that might well serve you when you're looking at kind of your next steps after university. As well as kind of also having opportunities to learn and kind of build opportunities with your professors to add to your CV, whether that's kind of working alongside them, internships, all of these that might also help to add to your CV. The other draw is learning about a new culture, US culture. This tends to be a big pull to international students who want to experience the US and all it has to offer. The US spans across 6 time zones. There's a great diversity in geography and cultures. The benefit of a US university kind of teaching and academic year is that you've got really long summer holidays to explore. And you might find that you make friends with Americans on college campuses that allow you to kind of travel back with them or travel across the country as well. And also just living on campus can also really help you to get a sense of US culture, US politics, US lifestyle, all through interacting on a day-to-day basis through your roommates, through your classmates, perhaps activities that you're taking part in, or even just observing certain US national holidays, whether that's Thanksgiving or 4th of July. So those are kind of the main areas or kind of, things that draw students to the US. I also wanted to share some differences, just for those of you that are kind of comparing UK versus US. Importantly, the US, that you'll find that there's typically longer programs. So a bachelor's degree in the US would be 4 years versus 3 in the UK. Admission to a university is, to the university as a whole, not a particular academic department. So as I was saying, you don't need to know what course or area you want to study at the time you apply, because you're not applying to a specific department, you're applying to the university. And again, that's reflecting that liberal arts idea, and this sense that you're not going to necessarily choose your major or what you even graduate in until later in your degree, compared to in the UK. Something to be aware of as a difference is that there's less government control and standardization at US universities. The positive from this is that there's more institutional diversity and freedom. But what that also means is that there's no set fees or centralized admissions process. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. In terms of the application process, it is slightly longer and it's more in depth, and that's because the admissions process is more holistic. It's more than just your grades. There isn't necessarily a complete equivalent to UCAS, but we do have guides on our website that help you kind of navigate what the application process looks like. And we'll also talk about this later on in this session. Other thing to be aware of is that you apply for your funding alongside your application for admission and not after you've been admitted. So if you're in a position where you need funding from a university or through a scholarship, through an external body, to enable you to attend that university, then it's important that you're doing that at the start and not waiting until after admission, because usually those pots of funding are closed at that stage. Just some things to be aware of as well in terms of law and medicine. This can only be studied at a postgraduate level in the US. So whereas in the UK you could study medicine, or you study medicine at the undergraduate as an undergraduate degree. Similarly with law, in the US you would have to complete an undergraduate degree, and then you would need to apply for a postgraduate degree for medicine and law. So just some key differences to be aware of. I also wanted to share some key terminology differences between the two systems. This hopefully will be helpful to know as you're starting to research programs in schools. Some of this terminology you might be coming across but not quite sure how that translates from a UK perspective. So importantly, for a US high school, they'll refer to grades 9 to 12. These correspond to UK secondary school years 10 to 13 if you're in England and Wales, years 11 to 14 in Northern Ireland, and S3 to S6 in Scotland. So those are kind of how they translate over. In the US, you will see the term college, university, school, institution tends to be used kind of interchangeably, and it's what we would refer to in the UK as a university. So a university or an institution that says that they are a college does not mean that the degree would be worth less. And in fact, college is usually the term that's used more than university in the US. Something to be aware of also in the US is that you will have what's called various classes or courses. We're kind of more familiar in the UK to them being called modules, but in the US, you will have that kind of being referred to as classes or courses. Your degree program or major for the US is actually what we would refer to as a course in the UK. So if you're doing a course in maths, perhaps your degree program or what you're majoring in would be math in the US. Hopefully that's kind of some helpful key terminologies for you to kind of be thinking about or noticing as you're doing your research. In terms of the application timeline and what that looks like, we ultimately recommend beginning to research universities about 12 to 18 months before you're intending to enroll. So that's typically at the end of year 12. We have kind of this timeline here. This is also on our website, but just so you've got a sense, you will start researching your universities kind of like I say, typically at the end of year 12. You may find that some of the universities that you're looking to apply to have admissions exam requirements. And if they do, then you would aim to register for them and take them in the summer after year 12. Just to be aware, a lot of universities don't require a standardized test score or any admissions exams, but you might come across those as part of your research. So just something to be aware of. You'll then want to finalise your selection of where you want to apply to in the early autumn of year 13, or about 10 to 12 months before you plan to enrol. I'll go over kind of some strategies on how you might do this later on. And then about 8 to 10 months, or the autumn of year 13, you would start putting together your application and you would submit that according to the deadlines. As I said, the US doesn't have a standardized central application process, and therefore different universities will have different deadlines. So you'll need to be aware of those. In the spring of year 13, or around 4 to 7 months before you're looking to enrol, you can then expect to hear back from the universities that you've applied to with their admissions decisions. Based off on where you were accepted, you would then notify universities of your decision to enrol or to not enrol. And if you're intending to enrol, you would apply then for your visa about 1 to 3 months before enrolment. There are a lot of resources on our website to help with pre-departure. So if you're enrolled, if you're heading out to a US university, there are resources on our website that help, and that includes some travel advice, information on living arrangements, campus life. So do have a look on our website. And then, as I said, preparing to head out, and then typically you'd be looking to start around mid-August to early September. So that would be when your first kind of term semester would start, which is slightly earlier in the UK, where that typically tends to be mid to late September, early October in some cases. So if you're kind of wondering how you might choose a university, as I said, there's 4,500 universities in the US. It's a really daunting process if you're looking at that and thinking, how do I narrow down my prospects? And ultimately, choosing is a really important step in this process of applying to US university. And it's really important that you give enough of your time to this. My top tip is that you spend 80% of your time and effort in researching and choosing the universities you are interested in, and only about 10% in actually applying, right? So the bulk of your time will be on selecting and narrowing down your university choices. So it's important that you're looking at this step, that you're thinking this through. And the key here really is to be flexible and open-minded. We'll discuss some strategies in just a second that you can implement in the choosing process as well. So what are some of the things that you might want to consider in the choosing process? It's really important to know the context of the US as you research, applying to the US study, and choosing which institutions you'd like to apply to. So as I said, there's no national set standard for universities. Universities are free to choose their own set of fees, course structures, student environments, etc., which, as I said, is different to in the UK, where institutions have set fees. They tend to have fairly similar environments and feels. And ultimately, that means that there's so much variety and diversity among institutions, which, as I said, we've touched on. But again, you want to kind of really be thinking a little bit about that. We'll talk about funding later, but I just wanted to highlight it here because funding is important. Well, if it's important to you, then it's something, as I said, that has to be considered from step one of the choosing process. You only want to be applying to universities. For example, if funding is important to you, you may only want to be applying to universities that can offer the financial aid that you would need as an international student. Not every institution in the US is able to offer institutional financial aid funding to international students. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but just something to bear in mind as well. Just a final note, you can complete your UCAS applications alongside US applications, including any courses that include a year abroad. So you can apply to both the US and the UK. In fact, we recommend that. You just need to be mindful of deadlines. In terms of helping to narrow down your choices, kind of that choosing process, I said right at the start this idea of fit. So we focus a lot on this term. What we're kind of getting at is focusing on what factors are important to you, locating those. What we want you to do is find a school, a program that's going to be the best fit for you and your personal and academic interests. And there are many factors that you'll want to be considering both in and out of the classroom. So you might want to think about the types of programs and departments, location and availability of funding, campus size. You might want to look at the academic environment. Is it rigorous, competitive, inclusive, supportive? Is there an international community on campus if that's important to you? You might also want to be, ultimately thinking about factors that are the most important to you, and then you might want to think about what priority, what ranking they sit in, when you're kind of determining your fit. So, for example, if you don't like the cold and snow, then maybe the East Coast isn't the best fit for you. If you're trying to save money, living in an urban place is definitely going to be more expensive than a rural place. And ultimately, that can vary from state to state. Do the universities that you're looking into match what you want out of them? So these are kind of the reflective questions that you're going to need to ask yourself to kind of determine what is important to you. We really encourage students to think beyond rankings and to focus instead on a variety of different factors. Rankings in the US are not the same as in the UK. Some don't rate the quality of teaching or graduate prospects, and some might give weight to how much money a university has, or even invite universities to peer rank themselves. So rankings can be useful tools, but we recommend that you take them with a pinch of salt and make sure that it's not the only method that you're using to choose a university. Also within ultimately within the choosing process, you want to make sure you're only applying to universities that you have researched and that you could see yourself attending for up to 4 years if you were offered a place. So, as I said, main thing to kind of start with is really reflecting and thinking about what factors are important to you and what types of institutions are available. The next step is then to use that information to begin researching universities. Unlike UCAS, you are not limited to 5 universities. So in theory, you could apply to as many as you like. Probably don't recommend that you apply to 4,500 universities. For time and financial reasons, we really recommend applying to no more than 6 to 10 universities. But to jumpstart your process of choosing what you want to focus on choosing to narrow down your institutions, you might want to start with a list of 10 to 20 schools that you think could be a good fit for you, and then start to kind of research them and remove them off the list if that's not the case, or add a university back on if you've taken one off and you're kind of looking and building your research. So you might be thinking, okay, well, how do I do that? We have a lot of resources, great resources on the choosing section of our undergraduate guide on our website, including links to search engines to help with the process of narrowing down your choices of universities. So this is one of the search engines that are linked on our website. It's called the Big Future College Search. There's a variety of filters that you can use, including filtering by type and size of school, the location by state, majors on offer. There's lots of different factors or filters rather that you can apply to those factors that you've been thinking through. And when you start, you'll see that without any filters, right, there are over the 4,500 universities listed. But as you start to apply different filters, this will narrow this down to a more manageable number. One thing to say is you're always going to want to double check the information on the school website afterwards. So there is information obviously on this website, but you're going to want to go to the individual university website to find out more about things like their application process, any funding, financial aid that they might have available. Once you narrow down your options and you research them further on the university website, and possibly even reach out to them directly, you're going to want to have, as I said, about 6 to 10 institutions where you will actually submit an application. So we suggest applying to 2 what we would call reach schools. These are schools where you would be thrilled to attend, but it would be a challenge for you to get in. If you're thinking about really ultra competitive universities, so universities like Yale, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, these would be reach schools for everybody, no matter your grades or achievements, just because of the level of competitiveness. So they would be considered reach schools. 3 to 4 match schools is schools where your profile is roughly on par with their average applicant. And then you're going to want to apply to 2 likely admittance schools. Think of these like your UCAS insurance choice, schools where your application would be very competitive. And as I said, you're going to do that once you've done that research. And that research is going to come from looking at university websites. They're going to have the most up-to-date information. You can, on university websites, find profiles of the average admitted applicant. You can find more information on programs, campus virtual tours, student life, sports, student housing, lots and lots of different areas that might help you to kind of decide if it's the best fit for you, as well as information on things like funding and financial aid. And you can also check out what resources they have for international students, as well as the different universities, or because different universities will offer different levels of support. So that's something to also be looking at, as well as your other research. You can also look at university social media channels. They can really help you get a feel for the college. You can discover more about the university's personality, what they're interested in, what they're focused on. And the other thing to say is, you're doing your university research, universities do want to hear from you. So do reach out to them. You can call, email them. We really recommend that if you're in that situation, that it's the student that is calling, that is emailing, that is reaching out, not the parent. Ultimately, the university is admitting the student, not the parent. So they want to hear from you. In the next slides, I'm just going to show you some examples of schools that you might not have heard of, but why it's important to kind of be thinking about research, about being flexible, and why they might be an option, right? So this is Middlebury College. It's a small liberal arts college in Vermont, in the northeast of the US. Vermont has lovely summers and cold winters, and even has its own ski mountain. And Middlebury College is really well known for languages, climate change, and climate science, with top professors in this subject. It's a small university with a focus on undergraduate studies. There's actually no graduate students, and that small size means there's lots of access to professors and opportunities to form close relationships. So this is an example of a university, a really top university that you might not have heard of. You can see kind of some of the areas that might be of interest, again, if you're someone that's interested in languages or in climate change. And as I said, this is a top university that you might not have heard of, but is actually super selective to get into as well. Scripps College is located in Claremont, California, just outside of LA. It's a liberal arts college with top professors. It's a college for women or female identifying people only, and is a great space for women to find their voice. It has great programs, for example, in museum studies and conservation. It's part of a consortium of 5 universities that share the campus, and these are Scripps, Harvey Mudd, Pitzer, Claremont McKenna, and Pomona. You might find that universities attend the same class. You might find that students attend the same class, but they're actually studying at different universities. They might be a student that's studying at Harvey Mudd, but are actually taking advantage of being able to access classes across the consortium. So these are really great as well to access kind of additional resources, additional classes, additional kind of social life. Consortiums can be really, really great. And this is another great college as well to be thinking about. And then finally, Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt University is a much bigger university in the middle of Nashville, Tennessee. It's Nashville, Tennessee is the home of country music. Vanderbilt has a vibrant campus with a big culture and art scene, which is very green and close to downtown. It's also got lots of research hospitals and a big engineering program. And so all of that contributes to this big university feel. So I also wanted to highlight here, this is an example of a university that's larger, that might fit more with what you're looking for if you're looking for that larger university experience. And again, these are 3 very different universities. They're all great in their own unique way, but they will be a fit for one person, but someone that's perhaps looking for a smaller campus experience, suburban campus experience, might find that Vanderbilt's not the right fit for them, and vice versa. So it's just about identifying is what this university or college offering something that I'm interested in, or that feels like the best place for me to study. Okay. Just a note before we move on to funding on the Ivy League. So the Ivy League is a term that I think it can be quite familiar with in the UK. But I wanted to just give a kind of note on what the Ivy League actually means. Historically, it's a sports league between the 8 oldest universities in New England. So sometimes in the UK, some students, some families hear Ivy League and they think that it's the equivalent to the Russell Group. That's not the case, right? This is not the Russell Group. No university can become an Ivy League college. It's more, like I say, about this historical sports league. And there are some universities that people in the UK think are part of the Ivy League, such as MIT and Stanford, but they're actually not. All universities in the Ivy League are private research universities. And so if you're focusing on just the Ivy League, you would be limiting your opportunities to explore other institutions, whether that's other large private research universities, or, as I was saying, liberal arts colleges, women's colleges, or specialist institutions. And we put Ivy League schools in the ultra competitive bracket. Some have admissions rates of 1% to 2%. So it's something to really be aware of. Oxford has an 18% admission rate, Cambridge has 21%, just to give you an idea of how they compare. And as I said, though we advise you to look at rankings with caution, it's really important to note that the top 1% of US universities would be the equivalent to over 40 institutions. And as I said, there's 4,500 institutions. Liberal arts colleges that are as highly regarded and competitive will be part of this 40, but will never be Ivy League or as well known in the UK, despite being top quality. So again, I just want to reiterate, just because you haven't heard of a university doesn't mean it's not a good fit. So again, really encouraging you to be open-minded and flexible when you're beginning your research and narrowing down your options. So funding is one of the top things that we get asked about, understandably so. So in this section, we're going to run through the costs that you can anticipate for studying in the US, the different sources of funding that you can pull from, and some strategies you can implement to find funding as well. So what cost should you expect? As I said, in the US, all universities can set their own fees. There's no standardized fee structure like in the UK. But things to be aware of in terms of like costs to consider. Firstly, application. If universities require admissions test scores, so this would be what we refer to as the SAT, the ACT. Those currently cost between 100 to 200 US dollars. Each university application will incur a fee. It's typically between $50 to $100, although many universities do offer fee waivers. You will also find that there are fees as an international student for your visa, for an embassy appointment, and what we refer to as a SEVIS fee, which is essentially the international student database that the Department of Homeland Security uses as part of your visa application. So there are application expenses to be aware of. You're also, in attending a university, there's going to be tuition and other fees associated with the university. As I said, there's no standardized fee. Costs can vary significantly since each university can set their own tuition and fee rates. Fees are mandatory. They usually cover things like the student union, school athletics, and membership to the university gym, kind of accessing resources on campus. There is this kind of funding misconception. Please don't be put off by the sticker price. The cost of attendance that you might see on when you're doing your research is kind of required for every university to share their cost of attendance. It will include the tuition and fees, but it will also include room and board, so your housing and your food costs and any personal expenses that you may have. And it might even include the cost of a trip home. So it's also about looking at what that cost includes. And as I said, whilst the cost of attendance will include things like room and board and some expenses. There are some other things that you'll also want to be thinking about as an international student. So there are things like health insurance, eating out, clothing, entertainment. And as I said earlier, the cost of living can really vary depending on where your university is located. Your housing costs will differ if you decide to live off campus, or if you're living off campus and you're going to need a car to travel to class, or if there's public transport available. So these are all things that you're going to need to consider and research and understand as part of your university research. There is some good news. There are a variety of funding opportunities available, and it is possible to have an affordable US university education. And in fact, many students are able to fully fund their studies without taking out any loans. But the key here really is to put the time and effort into seeking out and applying for funding while staying flexible on your options to enable you to access that type of funding. So where does the money come from? How do you kind of cover the cost of attendance, the cost of attending a US institution? I'll go into these in more detail across the way, but it hopefully is a good kind of summary to know that there are typically 4 sources of funding for study in the US. The first is personal and family funds. US universities will expect families to prioritise students' education and invest in the education when a child is born. So they expect your family to contribute in some form. So you do want to keep in mind that you may be expected to pay something. Another source comes from the US universities themselves. There are 2 types of funding. There's need-based aid and merit-based scholarships, which again, I'll explain in just a second. The amount of funding will vary greatly from university to university. So if financial aid is important to you, you need to look for and apply only to universities that can offer financial aid for international students. There are also external funding bodies. And then finally, there are loans. We advise loans to be your final resort. You cannot take UK student loans to the US, and US-based loans require you to have a US citizen or a permanent resident to co-sign the loan. So you can take the UK third-party loans, but then we would caution you to be careful around interest rates and payback terms. Just to note that if you do have US citizenship or you're a dual citizen, you can take out a loan and apply to federal loans through FAFSA. And we have more information about that on our website if you're in that position. Ultimately, something to keep in mind is that it might be that you have to pull from some or all of these different funding sources to fund your education. You may be able to access funding at a US university, but there may be an expectation or requirement for you also to input personal or family funds as well to meet the cost of attendance. In terms of university funding, ultimately it's ideal since it doesn't have to be paid back. There's 2 types of university funding that we kind of talk about, need-based financial aid and scholarships. University funding is likely to be awarded on the basis of financial need, which is based on your family's annual income. Could also be based on academic merit, whether that's performance in A-levels, high admissions test scores, or really niche criteria such as sports or a combination of the above. Need-based financial aid, as I said, it's based on financial need. Universities will calculate an expected family contribution, the amount they expect a family to be able to contribute, and they'll compare it to the total cost of attendance, and then they'll try to meet the gap. This is going to vary from university to university. Some can meet 20% of that gap, some 80%, some 100%. So again, it's really important that you look into this whilst you're doing your research if you need that funding to get you to the US. As you investigate funding, you'll also want to watch for information about whether the university makes scholarships available for international students. Not all of them do, so it's something to also be looking at. For top athletes, sports scholarships may also be available through athletic scholarships through the athletic recruitment process, and you can find more information on this available on our website. Something to be aware of when you're looking at university funding, as I've already kind of said, do check the university's website. This is where you'll find the up-to-date information you need. They are required to share the full cost of attendance on their website, so you should be able to find that. You will also be able to find information about what funding options there are, if they're able to offer any funding to international students and to what level. It's really important that you're proactive, that you're searching for that information on the website, and if you're finding that you've still got questions or need to kind of understand more how that might work for you and your situation, do get in touch with the university's financial aid officers, as they're best placed to answer those questions. Often the process for applying is straightforward. It's usually integrated into the admissions process, but as I said, you need to be applying for this type of funding at the start when you're applying also for admission as well, and not after you've been admitted. The other thing I mentioned were external funding bodies. Funding bodies may include a wide range of professional, charitable or government organisations external to the university. So they can be thought of as niche scholarships, as they have certain specific criteria based on the mission of the funding body. So it might be that they're looking for students from a particular country of origin, ethnicity, religious faith, interest in a particular field, gender, interest, talents. You may find that there's an external funding body that meets kind of you. If you're unique in any way, you just need to find it. So one example that I like to share is the Moorhead Kane Scholarship. They offer a scholarship for students, candidates that are able to demonstrate leadership, character, scholarship, and physical vigour. They provide a 4-year fully funded educational experience for students of the highest calibre at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So that's an example of a scholarship body that you could be looking at. And there are thousands of funding bodies, so searching is going to require time and dedication to sift through the different listings, and you may need to submit separate applications to each. So again, we encourage students to apply first for university funding opportunities and then for external funding. And we have a link on our website to scholarship search engines, which can be a really great tool to kind of narrow those down. There are 3 different approaches to a funding strategy. You could explore universities in places with a lower cost of living, which is the same in the UK. For example, London will be more expensive than Lancaster, just like New York and California are going to be more expensive than states like Ohio or Georgia. So American universities will list on their website the full estimated cost of attendance, and then you can scope out places with lower costs of living as you're doing your research. Another thing to look for are programs with lower tuition. As I've said, universities can charge what they like, and ultimately it's down to them, but typically state universities funded by the government will be more affordable. And as discussed again, you can look for funding opportunities available at the universities themselves. I also wanted to mention community colleges. Community college is becoming an increasingly popular choice in the US as an alternative pathway that can help save a lot of money. Generally, community colleges award associate degrees, which is not a degree offered in the UK, but is a degree that often has a professional or vocational focus. They also, however, have programs that allow students to take a 2+2 transfer pathway. And what this means is that students can start their studies at a community college and then they transfer to a 4-year university, receiving a bachelor's degree from that university in another 2 years. Many colleges and universities have transfer agreements that make that easier, so they have partnerships. So, for example, Los Angeles Valley College, a 2-year community college, has a partnership with universities like UCLA, University of Southern California, or Cal Poly. This, is an attractive option, right? Community colleges are much less expensive than 4-year universities, so you can save thousands by paying the significantly lower tuition of a community college for 2 of the 4 years. Smaller class sizes can be especially available for the introductory classes, which also allows for students to have more contact with professors. Also, they generally involve less rigorous application processes and entry requirements than a 4-year university. Students with BTECs or other similar qualifications might apply to a community college, and as I said, many do not require admissions exam scores for admission. If you want more information on this, again, there's information on our website, including a link to a community college webinar, so you can learn more about that there. Since applying for funding is simultaneous to the admissions process, as I said, you want to begin your search for funding early. Bear in mind that it will take time to research the funding options at each school, and you will want to apply, to research the funding options at each school you want to apply to, and then also the external scholarships if necessary. As I said, best resources for funding are the university websites themselves and online scholarship searches. It's really important that you have or consider having a funding strategy to help you along the way. To fully fund your studies, you may need a combination, as I said, of the different types of funding that we've discussed. So you might want to investigate those, have a think about how they best work for you and the universities that you're looking at. And as I said, you might, you want to be thinking about remaining flexible. You don't just want to apply where thousands of other British students apply to, or somewhere where you might not be the most competitive. There's a fishbowl on screen because it's a great visual reminder of this. You want to be tactical, you want to be competitive. And so, look at universities that have fewer international students where you may be more sure to stand out. So that's kind of on funding. I also wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about completing an application and kind of what they're looking for. The experience and the process and kind of what universities are looking for does differ from the UK, as I've already said. US universities are looking at what we call a holistic admissions process. In terms of what they're looking for and what that encompasses, academics are there. US universities will look first for academic achievement measured by your results. That would be from your GCSEs and your A-levels or equivalent. And they also may be looking at admissions test scores if they require those. You can check university websites, as I've said, for average applicant profile, and you can use that to compare your results with their average student scores. Something to be aware of is that academic achievement alone will not guarantee entrance to competitive US universities because of this holistic approach. They'll also be looking at your academic fit. What are your reasons for pursuing a degree at their institution? How does it help towards your goals? For example, if you want to be in New York, why NYU over Columbia? Or why this particular program? What does that offer that another one doesn't? Or is there a specific campus activity that you're hoping to take advantage of? Or maybe you value one's mission and values over another's. Extracurriculars are also a really big focus in the US. Again, this idea of kind of being able to kind of get a sense of the person. They want to know what you're doing, not just inside the classroom, but also outside of it. You don't have to be doing everything under the sun, but they do encourage you, and we do encourage you to, highlight what you're involved in. What is a passion of yours? What are you doing outside of the classroom that could help you stand out? They will also be looking at your personal attributes. As I said, because of the holistic admissions process, they're looking at the whole person, not just those academics. They want to diversify their campuses and their classrooms. And so they want to know who you are. That might be, as I said, your interest in your academic field of choice, your overall interest, what you're doing inside and outside of the classroom, but also your character. Who are you? What do you value? What might you bring to the campus? Have you got leadership abilities that could really stand you in good stead and allow you to contribute to the university life as well? So that's kind of what they're looking for. In terms of the application components, as I've said already, unlike in the UK, you will apply to each university individually rather than a centralised body like UCAS. And you can apply to as many universities as possible, but as I've said, 6 to 10 would be what we would recommend, both for time and cost. There is a platform called the Common App, the Common Application, which around 900 universities use. It works similar to UCAS in terms of it being a system that helps to streamline parts of your application, but it differs in the sense that there are parts of your application to each university that you will need to tailor. So you may find that there's different questions being asked, different supplementary essay questions that you'll need to be completing. And as I said, not It's only 900 universities that are using the common application, so there will be some universities, very likely, right, 900 out of 4,500 that will use their own admissions application. So there's no standard process, and that also means that the deadlines and the requirements will vary by university to university. So they'll set their own. So you'll need to look at that as part of your research. But broadly speaking, most applications will follow a similar format. So you should be able to reuse or adapt materials that you prepare for each, but to kind of meet what they're looking for, generally what you'll find is that there's an application form with basic demographics, questions about you being asked. If required, you'll need to submit admissions test scores, a transcript, which kind of outlines your achieved grades at GCSE or equivalent and your expected grades or achieved grades at A level, depending on, or equivalent, depending on when you're applying. You'll also need to submit 2 to 3 essays and then 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. So your letters of recommendation, your transcript will come through and from your school. So you'll work with them on that. And then finally, there'll be an application fee. As I said, normally it's between $50 to $100 per application. Some institutions are able to offer a fee waiver. So you'll need to also research that to see if that applies for you. In terms of admissions deadlines, there are various different kind of cycles or decision rounds that you could participate in depending on the university. So for the regular decision, students typically apply by the 1st of January and they hear by the 1st of April. This type of deadline is what we would say is non-binding. It's non-restrictive. You can apply to as many universities as you like. Again, we recommend 6 to 10. There are early action deadlines, which means students typically applying by the 1st of November, hearing usually by December. And this is, again, non-binding and non-restrictive, so you can apply to other universities alongside that. Early decision is slightly different. There are 2 deadlines. The first is early decision 1 in November, and then some universities also offer early decision 2 in January. Very importantly, these are what are called binding applications. They should be your first choice worldwide. And if accepted, it means that you would withdraw any other applications worldwide and attend that university. You're making what's called an early decision commitment to attend that institution. So you apply to only one institution early decision. And the understanding is that you will enroll if accepted. The only exception would be if you had an inability to attend because of funding. But otherwise, you would be expected. There is a benefit of applying early decision. You'll hear back, or even early in general, you'll hear back earlier. The applicant pool is smaller. In terms of early decision, it really allows you to show your interest, your passion for that institution, and that can also mean that you've got a better chance of admission. It can also mean that you're more competitive for funding. That might be when the most funding is available. So something to be aware of. And again, if you applied early, you should receive a decision by the end of December, middle to end of December. And if you apply in the regular round, you would receive a decision by the 1st of April. And then there are 3 types of decisions. So you might find that you apply to a university and you are accepted, you are waitlisted, or you are not accepted. Something to be aware of is that US universities do not offer, if you've been admitted and you've been accepted, they don't offer conditional admissions. So that means receiving certain scores on your final year exams in order to be admitted. That being said, you will be expected to meet your grades. It's just a slightly different kind of perspective. You will receive an offer of admission, you were accepted, you're expected to meet your grades or as close to, and the better that you do, the in doing that, the better position you'll be in. If you fall very far away from the grades that a university is expecting, in those extreme cases, they can reconsider your admissions because you don't have the same academic profile that they have admitted. So something to be aware of. In terms of admissions tests, I've mentioned them throughout this session. Ultimately, they are used particularly in the US where there's no national curriculum at secondary school, so they are used to evaluate applicants from diverse areas and schools. Um, you will want to check if they're required. Like, as I said, not every university is requiring this. An increasing amount of universities have gone or are test optional. You can find a list of schools on fairtest.org. Not all are, not all universities will expect it, but there are some that are not optional for international students. So you do need to kind of have a look and do that as part of your research, and just check if they're required. In terms of ACT or SAT, one is not considered better than the other. It's just what's the best fit for you. So what you'll want to be thinking about is kind of, which is the best fit. And the best way to do that is to take a timed full length practice test of each. You can usually find free online exams for both ACT and SAT. So you should kind of take one and then make a decision. There's also a difference in cost, in exam length. So you might just want to determine which is a better fit for you, or which has the most availability in terms of a test date, a test centre as well. So something to be aware of. As I mentioned, transcripts as part of your application. This would be a list of your academic qualifications. As I've said, it would mark your years 10 to 13, 11 to 14, or S3 to S6, depending where in the UK you're applying from. It's generated by your school, so you may need to provide your school with information about what to include, as well as any additional reports or school reports that they're looking for. There are templates, there's lots of information on our website, so I'd recommend having a look there. Really important that you're not looking to convert your marks between the UK and the US. Your school, your transcript should have your marks, your grades as they are in the UK, and then the US university will assess and review, and if they need to convert and kind of translate your marks, they'll do that themselves. So just something to be aware of. In terms of recommendation letters, as I said, these are also coming from not you, but from a recommender. Generally, you'll need to kind of gather 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. They're kind of like a marketing tool for you as an applicant. And your referees might have particular areas that they can speak to, depending on who you pick and what they can kind of talk to. But you might want to direct your referees to write about your ability to succeed at university, your ability to positively contribute to the university department or campus life, your leadership, any involvement that you've got in school and in your community. And you should be thinking about asking someone who knows you well, whether that's both in and out of the classroom. And something to be aware of is that the university that you apply to may provide some loose guidelines or some specific guidelines for selecting a recommender who would write that recommendation letter. So you might find that they say that you would need 1 letter from your counsellor. This would be a teacher in school, someone that can talk about you, like I say, as generally in the school environment, and perhaps even your achievements outside of school. And then you may also be asked to provide a letter that's from a teacher who is actively teaching you in the classroom. Generally, it will be your responsibility to choose and liaise with those kind of writers of your recommendation letters, and to give them the necessary information to complete a recommendation letter. So we would encourage you to consider meeting with your referee to discuss that letter. It's in your best interest, right, to give them the information they need to write the best letter you can. And you might find that there are things that you're doing outside of school that they don't know about that you will want to kind of talk about. And you might also want to discuss your reasons for doing an undergraduate degree, your interest in the particular universities that you've selected, or your future goals or your academic achievements, all these things that they could add into that letter to kind of talk about who you are. Really important that you make sure that they're aware of deadlines and the paperwork that they need to be completing. Again, it's your responsibility to inform them. They're not necessarily going to know that to hand. So you'll want to work with them to make sure that they've got what they need and they understand what is needed as part of your application. Something that we also say is really do encourage your referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. American referees tend to write in a really enthusiastic tone. They'll use very positive and descriptive language. they'll discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom, and they'll talk about the applicant personally. So that's something to keep in mind about what's going to be written by your American counterparts that are also applying to university when you're preparing your UK referees to write their letters. So encourage them to refrain from being, restrained, modest, to kind of not highlight your achievements. It's really, this is the time to boast about who you are, and who you could be and what you could contribute to that university. So essays are also something to be aware of in terms of the application. These are one of the most important parts of it for the undergraduate study in the US, and they can really help set you apart from other applicants and give an opportunity to showcase yourself to a university. Really importantly, these are not a UCAS personal statement. Rather than just submitting an explanation of your interests and your achievements in a particular field of study, as you would via UCAS, you're actually going to be asked to respond to between 1 to 3 essay questions. And each university will set their own questions as well as a desired length for your response. So they're going to vary, and they're going to allow you ultimately to kind of pick and choose. If you are using the Common App, if you're applying to a university that uses the Common Application, as I said, one of those 900, then there'll be one essay question that will go to all universities, and then there'll be a supplemental question that will go to that will be unique to the institution. Again, that's for universities that are participating with the Common App. One of the prompts on the Common App that I can share, is something like reflect a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking and what was the outcome? Another one is describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? So you'll see that these are very different styles. They're encouraging you to be reflective, introspective, and to really give the university a real sense of who you are. And so that's just something, I guess, to be aware of. I wanted to share a couple of examples, or at least one, of a university question, a supplemental question, just so you get an idea of what they might look like. As I said, universities want to get an idea of who you are in your essays, but sometimes those questions can also show you something about the university culture and ethos as well. So the University of Chicago is really known for its comedy, and campus can be quirky, and you'll see this kind of in their essay prompts. So one of their questions is find X. One of their other questions is what's so odd about odd numbers. So just a kind of sense of that quirky perspective. Dartmouth College is an Ivy League school in New Hampshire. They're also deeply personal about their questions. So when you meet someone for the first time, what do you want them to know about you, but generally don't tell them? Hopefully this is just giving you a sense and an understanding that this is not your UCAS personal statement. This is not where you need to go on and on about your interest in maths. Universities want to know more about who you are as a person. In terms of some writing tips, things to kind of be thinking about as you're preparing your essays, please do make sure you're answering the question fully. You want to use clear and concise language, and you want to avoid being vague or using empty statements or cliches. If you reuse an essay, you might find that you're able to use an essay that you've produced for one institution, and it fits for the questions that are being asked for another university. That's fine to do, but be careful to submit the correct essay to the correct university or program. And so really make sure that you've not applied to Dartmouth, but you've referenced the University of Chicago in your essay answer. It's not a great look, and it will cause the university to question whether you have truly understood the institution and determined that personal sense of fit for them. Do proofread extensively. Ask others to proofread your essays and offer their feedback. That could be a friend, that could be a parent or guardian, that could be a teacher in school. So do kind of use those resources to help. Really importantly, perhaps most importantly, please be yourself. Don't give the admissions office and officers the answers that you think they want to hear. Give them the truth, because they'll be able to see through fake and not genuine responses. As I said, they want to understand you, they want to know what sets you apart. So it's really important that you let your personality come through in the essay. On our website, we have more tips on writing essays, and we actually have links to some example essays. You'll also be able to find some examples on university websites as well, so do have a look online. That's kind of my summary of the undergraduate, 4-year undergraduate experience and kind of process of applying. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about some other opportunities in the US. This might be for you if you decide that a full 4-year undergraduate degree in the US is not the best fit for you. Things to be aware of, right? You can go to the US whilst you're at a UK university through university exchange programs. So many UK universities will have those programs established with US universities or US-based study abroad programs. So the University of Manchester, for example, has partnerships with a number of universities in the US. This could be logistically simpler for you. It will help, your universities can help arrange it. It might be part of, if it's part of your degree program in the UK, you may also be able to access UK student funding that will allow you to kind of spend your year abroad in the US and then come back and finish your degree in the UK. There are also summer institutes. So the study of the US Institutes for Student Leaders, for example, are intensive, short-term academic programs whose purpose is to help provide groups of undergraduate student leaders with a deeper understanding of the United States, whilst also helping to enhance leadership skills at the same time. So there are some kind of shorter-term summer opportunities. Or if you really love America, you really want to study and learn more about American culture, history, you can spend your degree studying it. There are American studies programs which allow you to kind of get all of that learning, but they often include a year in the US as well as part of your degree. You also might think about internships and summer work, whether that's through programs like Camp America or BUNAC. So there's also kind of those opportunities. And then you may also want to be thinking about postgraduate study. If the undergraduate study is not the right fit for you at this time, there is also the opportunity to study at a postgraduate level. And we do have information on our website, both as Education USA, as I've mentioned, the Fulbright Commission offers Fulbright awards at the postgrad level as well. So you could also have a look at that. And we also, through Education USA, we have webinars throughout the year. I think one is coming up in a couple of weeks that is dedicated to postgraduate studies. So if that's of interest to you and you want some more detail on that, you could also have a look there. In terms of ways that we can help beyond this webinar, I'm going to talk you through some different areas, different programs that also might be of help. So I wanted to highlight the Sutton Trust Fulbright US program. This is a program that's in partnership with the Sutton Trust, a social mobility organisation, and it's a 2-year program for high achieving year 12 students. There is, like I say, a lot of programming. You'll have the chance to take part in online sessions, in-person residentials where you'll receive support to learn about, explore and apply for undergraduate study in the US. Applications for this year have just closed, but if you are in year 11 or below right now and thinking that this could be a really great opportunity for you, you've got plenty of time to look into it before applications open for the next cycle at the end of this year. As I said, I've mentioned this throughout this webinar. We have a website. Please do have a look at it. You can visit our website for advice, for guides, for information about events, whether that's webinars or in-person events. And under the Education USA advice section of our website, there is information really detailed about undergraduate study in the US, with details on choosing, funding, applying, and even preparing to attend a US university. And then we've also got our program section, which will detail more about some of our programs as well. So do have a look there. Just go back one. As I said, we do hold events. So we hold online events such as this webinar regularly. There are some that are dedicated just to this kind of broader idea of undergraduate study to give an overview, whereas there are others that are very much specific to a certain topic or area of interest. So do have a look at those. If you aren't able to join those live, if you miss them, we have a range of videos covering those topics on our website and on our YouTube channel as well. So do have a look there. You also might find us at university fairs across the country. We attend those in person, and we are there ready to help kind of give any advice, guidance, and answer any questions that you might have. So do have a look out for us as well. And you can find more information about that on our website. And then finally, we do take questions by email. You can use the contact form on our website to get in touch. We check our advising inbox between Mondays and Fridays. And so please do reach out to us if you've got any questions that are very specific to you that you want to kind of get more information on. We can work with you on a more one-to-one basis there. And then finally, we also host our annual USA College Day. This happens every year in September, and this year the event will take place on Friday, the 25th and 26th of September. There will be more information on our website. This is the biggest event of our calendar, where we invite university representatives from across the US to exhibit at our fair. It's a free event. All you need to do to attend is register in advance. And if you sign up to our mailing list now, there's a QR code on screen right now. If you sign up to that, you'll receive a notification of when registration opens. This tends to be in the late summer, but something to kind of put in the diary if you want to learn more, and in particular if you want to interact directly with US university admissions officers, the very people who might be making decisions about your application if you apply there. So something to bear in mind. Okay. Finally, we have a couple of minutes for some questions. I'm just going to double check the question box. I'm just going to give myself a minute, and then I will come back on screen and see which questions I'm able to answer now. Okay, so there are some questions in the box. If you've got any, please feel free to ask. It's also just to say if we run out of time or if we're not able to answer this question here and you've still got those questions, please do email in. As I said, please use our contact form on our website, and we can get back in touch with you and answer those questions directly. A couple of you have asked if there'll be a recording shared after this session. Yes, you will receive a recording of this webinar, and you will also be able to access it on our website over the next month. So something to keep an eye out for. Someone's asked, when you apply to a US university, would that be alongside your 5 UK applications through UCAS? So yes, it would be separate. It doesn't count as part of the 5. So you could apply to 5 UK universities through UCAS. And then you could also apply to, as many US universities as you want. Again, we recommend no more between 6 to 10, just for time and cost purposes. I've had some questions about some very specific athletics or sports. Please do have a look on our website. We actually have a whole section dedicated to athletics recruitment and what that process looks like. And then if you've still got questions there, I'd recommend that you drop us an email and we can pick up with you there. Question also that I've seen is, when would you recommend kind of asking school to produce transcripts recommendation letters? So I would say, again, think it depends ultimately when you're looking to apply. If you're looking to submit an application in the autumn of year 13, it might be something that you want to start having a conversation with your school about in the summer of year 12, or at the very latest in September of year 13. They're going to need some time to prepare those documents. So I think kind of around that time, it usually works, but it might be something to check in with them depending on their own timelines and schedules and things like that. And I was also asked, do referees have to send recommendation letters to each school you apply to? So again, it will come down to what requirements the university has. Broadly speaking, they'll expect some documents from school, transcript, and likely at least one letter of recommendation. It will depend on the university. So if the university is a university that participates in the common application, then your teacher, your counsellor can upload your letters of recommendation, your transcript onto that platform, and it will go to any universities that you've applied to that are using that. But if you're applying to an institution that doesn't have or doesn't use the Common App, has their own application portal, then yes, the teacher, the counsellor will also need to submit the application, the school materials directly to them. Again, there may be some instructions around that, so do have a look on the website of the university to kind of know. Just having a scoot through to see if there's any question I can answer just before we finish up. Someone's asked about like reaching out to institutions. Do they check? Is it worth it? Again, demonstrating your interest for some institutions, for some universities, is really important. Again, it's part of that way to demonstrate your sense of fit, your interest, demonstrating that you're the right candidate or applicant for that school. So again, if you've got questions to ask, if you want to kind of demonstrate your interest, then we would recommend that you reach out to them. Again, there's information about that on our website as well. I know that there's a few more questions that have been asked that I've not been able to answer. One last one I'll answer actually before we finish is whether you need to send all of your GCSE results to an institution. So you will need to provide, again, through the transcript that will come from your teacher, they will need to provide a list of all of your achieved grades. That includes any and all GCSE grades that you have sat. So that will be something that will need to be on your transcript as well. Okay. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you found it useful and that it's given you some food for thought and perhaps some actions and next steps to help deepen your research as part of your kind of exploration of undergraduate US study. Again, if you've asked a question or if your question comes to mind that you haven't had answered this evening, please do email us, use our contact form that will come to our inbox, and we'll come back to your questions there. And as I said, a recording of this webinar will be available in due course. And otherwise, if you're looking for more information, please do use our website as well. But otherwise, wishing you a fantastic evening, and thank you very much for watching this session. Take care. Bye-bye.